Trapped 80 floors above Chicago in a steel box, a ruthless billionaire CEO and a desperate single father faced a glitch in a $3 billion smart building. What happened next wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a corporate sabotage exposed by a wrench, changing tech history forever. Friday evening, rain hammered against the reinforced glass of the Genesis Tower, a breathtaking $3 billion architectural marvel piercing the Chicago skyline. Powered by a customized IBM Watson AI core and built with cutting-edge Johnson Controls automation, the building was billed as the smartest, safest structure on the planet. It was a fortress of silicon and steel, completely autonomous, managing everything from the biometric security gates to the microscopic adjustments in HVAC airflow. David Hayes wiped the grease from his hands onto a rag, his muscles aching from a 14-hour shift. He was an independent contractor, a systems mechanic hired through a subsidiary of Siemens to troubleshoot the localized cooling vents on the 71st floor. At 34, David's life was a spreadsheet of impossibilities. Since his wife passed away 3 years ago, he had been raising his 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, entirely alone. His mind was currently split between the schematic of a faulty thermal sensor and the ticking clock. He was already 20 minutes late to pick Chloe up from her after-school program. The overtime pay was the only reason he had stayed, desperately needing the extra funds to cover Chloe's upcoming dental surgery. Packing his heavy canvas tool bag, David rushed toward the elevator banks. The main worker lifts were offline for scheduled maintenance, a routine protocol dictated by the building's AI. He sprinted down the pristine, marble-clad hallway toward the executive wing, hoping to catch a ride down to the lobby before the childcare center called Child Services. Evelyn Croft stood in the executive foyer of the 88th floor, her posture as rigid and flawless as the bespoke Tom Ford suit she wore. As the CEO and majority shareholder of Croft Holdings, she practically owned the Chicago skyline. Worth an estimated $4 billion, Evelyn was known in the financial pages as a brilliant, uncompromising visionary. Today had been brutal, even by her standards. She had just finalized a hostile acquisition of a rival tech firm, and subsequently fired her own chief technology officer, a man who had dared to question the security protocols of the Genesis Tower's new over-the-air firmware update. "I don't pay you to find problems with my investments, Richard," she had told him coldly an hour earlier. "I pay you to ensure there are none. Clear your desk." Now, craving a stiff drink and the silence of her penthouse, Evelyn swiped her platinum keycard over the biometric reader. The custom-built Otis Skybuild executive elevator, a sleek, soundproof pod of brushed titanium and mirrored glass, slid open in utter silence. She stepped inside, pressing the button for the underground private garage. Just as the heavy doors began to glide shut, a work boot wedged into the gap. The sensors beeped in mild protest, and the doors retracted. David stumbled into the pristine cabin, breathing heavily, his tool bag hitting the floor with a dull thud. He smelled of copper wiring, sweat, and industrial lubricant. Evelyn took a distinct step back, her sharp green eyes narrowing. "This is a private executive car. The service elevators are located in the East Wing." David offered a breathless, apologetic smile, hitting the lobby button. "Sorry, ma'am. Main lifts are locked out for an AI diagnostic. I'm running late for my kid. I'll stay out of your way." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She debated using her override code to halt the car and have security escort him out, but the sheer exhaustion in her bones won out. She turned her gaze to the digital floor indicator, watching the numbers tick down. 87, 86, 85. The descent was incredibly fast, engineered to drop passengers at 22 miles per hour without them feeling a single shift in gravity. The silence between them was thick, the invisible wall between a billionaire and a blue-collar worker starkly drawn in the confined space. Then, at floor 74, the unthinkable happened. A sound like a localized earthquake violently shook the cabin. The lights flickered, buzzing with an angry, electrical hiss before dying completely. The regenerative drive systems, usually silent, screamed in a high-pitched metallic grind. The sheer force of the sudden deceleration threw David against the wall. Evelyn gasped, her high heels failing to grip the floor, and she collapsed hard against the brass handrail. The elevator didn't just stop, it seized. The digital displays vanished. The hum of the ventilation system choked out. Pitch blackness swallowed them. What did you do? Evelyn's voice cut through the dark, laced with immediate, accusatory panic. Me? I didn't touch anything, David groaned, pushing himself up from the floor. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his heavy-duty Maglite flashlight, clicking it on. The harsh white beam swept across the cabin, illuminating Evelyn, who was clutching her wrist and glaring at him. "This is a $3 billion facility," Evelyn stated, her voice trembling slightly but wrapped in authoritative anger. "It has triple redundant backup generators. It does not just stop." "Well, your $3 billion box is currently a brick," David muttered, sweeping the flashlight over the dead control panel. Suddenly, a red emergency strip light blinked on along the ceiling, bathing the cabin in a sinister crimson glow. A synthesized voice, smooth but completely devoid of warmth, echoed from the hidden speakers. "Critical error. Genesis core offline. Level 4 containment protocol engaged. Oxygen circulation paused to prevent external hazard contamination. Please remain calm." Evelyn pushed past David, slamming her hand against the dead touchscreen of the control panel. Aegis. Recognize voice command. Croft, Evelyn, CEO, override code Alpha 7 Tango. Restore power. The AI did not respond. David watched her, his mechanics brain already calculating the variables. Level 4 containment? That's meant for biological massive fires. The system thinks the building is compromised. It's sealing the shafts. "That's impossible," Evelyn snapped, pulling out her iPhone. "I have a direct line to the Cisco emergency response team." She stared at her screen. "No service? How is there no service?" "We have dedicated internal cell repeaters on every floor. Because the building's exterior is coated in low-E glass and reinforced with a steel mesh for climate efficiency," David explained, leaning against the wall. "When the main power dies and the repeaters go down, this whole shaft becomes a giant Faraday cage. No signals get in, none get out." Evelyn turned to him, the reality of the situation finally piercing her corporate armor. The air in the cabin was already beginning to feel heavy, the residual coolness of the AC fading. "We are stuck," she whispered, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. "Yeah," David said, crouching down to unzip his tool bag. "We're stuck. And if that computer actually cut the ventilation, we have a much bigger problem than missing my daughter's bedtime." The temperature inside the titanium box was rising. Without the localized climate control, the residual heat from the massive elevator motors above them began radiating down the shaft. It had only been 45 minutes, but the psychological weight of the confined space was pressing heavily on them both. Evelyn was pacing, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. She had already tried the emergency intercom button over 30 times. It was completely dead, an impossible scenario given that it was hardwired into an independent IP routing system. "It's a glitch. It has to be a glitch from the OTA update Richard pushed yesterday," Evelyn muttered, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair, ruining it. "When I get out of here, I am going to sue Johnson Controls into bankruptcy. I'll dismantle them." "You can fire whoever you want tomorrow," David said quietly. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, using his Leatherman multi-tool to pry off the sleek brass trim around the primary control interface. "But tonight, we need to focus on breathing." Evelyn stopped pacing and glared down at him. "What are you doing? Do not damage that panel. The hardware behind there is custom-built and highly sensitive." David didn't look up. "Look, lady, you know how to buy buildings. I know how they work. This isn't a software glitch. Software glitches trigger safe mode protocols. They send elevators to the nearest floor and open the doors. This is a hardline sever. The system didn't just crash. It was blinded." Evelyn frowned, crouching slightly. "Blinded? What do you mean?" "The AI runs on a CAN bus network. It needs constant telemetry from the sensors to know where the elevator is," David explained, finally popping the trim off with a sharp crack. He unscrewed the faceplate and pulled it forward, exposing a jungle of fiber optic wires and copper nodes. He shined his flashlight into the cavity. "Look," Evelyn leaned in, the scent of her expensive perfume mixing with the metallic tang of the open circuitry. David pointed the beam at a thick cluster of blue wires. They weren't just disconnected, they were cleanly sliced. "Someone cut the physical data lines," David said, his voice lowering. "You can't do that with a keyboard." Someone physically accessed the maintenance shaft on this car and snipped the telemetry feed before we got in. The AI thinks this car doesn't exist anymore. Evelyn's face went pale in the red emergency light. The implications hit her fast and hard. "Richard," she breathed out, "my CTO. I fired him today because he warned me the new firmware had a back door. He wanted to halt the rollout. I told him he was stalling progress." "Well, it looks like he decided to prove a point," David said, shifting his weight. "Or someone who paid him did." "If this was intentional," Evelyn said, her voice shaking slightly, then the ventilation shutting off. "Yeah, it's not a glitch, it's a trap." David looked at her, seeing the billionaire CEO facade completely strip away, leaving only a terrified human being. "Who else knew you were taking this specific car at this exact time?" "Nobody," she said. "Only my executive assistant. And the board. We just finished the BlackRock acquisition meeting on the 88th floor. They all took the helipad. I went down. Somebody wanted you out of the picture, or they wanted to hold you hostage inside your own infallible building," David said. He wiped sweat from his forehead. The air was definitely growing thinner. Each breath required a little more effort. David reached into his bag and pulled out a heavy-duty pair of wire strippers and a voltage meter. "What are you going to do?" Evelyn asked, her tone shifting from commanding to relying. "I'm going to try to bypass the digital lock and hotwire the analog emergency brake release. If I can disengage the primary clamp, the counterweight should slowly pull us up to floor 75. We can manually pry the doors open there." "Is it dangerous?" David paused, looking at a specific red node. "If I cross the wrong relay, the safety brake disengages completely. The counterweight won't pull us up, gravity will pull us down. We'll free fall 70 floors. Evelyn swallowed hard. She looked at this stranger, a man whose name she hadn't even bothered to ask, holding her life in his grease-stained hands. "Why were you running late?" she asked suddenly, needing a distraction from the wires. "You mentioned your kid." David's hands stopped moving for a microsecond. "Chloe. She's 6. She goes to an after-school program, but they charge by the minute if you're late. I promised her I'd be there to help her build a cardboard spaceship tonight." He gave a small, sad smile. "I work a lot. Don't get to make a lot of promises. Really didn't want to break this one." "I don't have children," Evelyn said softly, sitting on the floor opposite him, ignoring the dirt on her designer suit. "I built this company instead. I poured everything into this tower. I thought I was in control of everything." She looked around the claustrophobic box. "Money doesn't buy oxygen, does it?" "No," David said, isolating 2 wires. "It just buys a fancier coffin. Now, hold this flashlight steady. Don't shake. I need to strip this line without touching the copper." Evelyn took the heavy mag light. Her hands were trembling, but she gripped it with both hands, aiming the beam exactly where he pointed. For the first time in her life, the CEO was taking orders, relying entirely on a single father equipped with nothing but a wrench and raw instinct to outsmart a $3 billion trap. David clamped his tool onto the wire. "Okay, here goes nothing." He pulled. Sparks showered from the exposed terminal, illuminating the cramped titanium cabin in sharp, blinding bursts of blue and white. David grunted, his forearms straining as he clamped down on the heavy-gauge copper wiring. Beside him, Evelyn Croft flinched, instinctively shielding her face, but she didn't drop the maglite. The beam remained fixed on David's grease-stained hands. A sickening, metallic groan reverberated through the shaft. For a terrifying 2 seconds, the elevator dropped. Evelyn let out a sharp cry, her knees buckling as weightlessness seized her stomach. Then, an immense, shuddering thud shook the cabin. The downward motion halted violently. "The primary clamp is off," David gasped, wiping a mixture of sweat and grease from his brow. He leaned against the mirrored wall, his chest heaving. The secondary magnetic brakes engaged just like they were supposed to. Now, if the counterweight math is in our favor, the Otis drive mechanism should automatically try to level us out. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The air was growing noticeably thinner, carrying the sharp, acrid scent of ozone from the sparked wires. Evelyn watched the digital floor indicator, which remained a dead, blank void. "Is it working?" she whispered, her voice losing its usual boardroom authority. "Wait for it," David replied, his eyes closed, listening to the building. Deep within the bowels of the Genesis Tower, massive steel cables, thick as a man's wrist, began to groan under extreme tension. Slowly, Agonizingly, the elevator cabin gave a sudden lurch upward. It was a jerky, unnatural movement, nothing like the buttery smooth ride the $3 billion system usually provided. But they were moving. Clack, creak, clack. "We're going up," Evelyn said, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked at David, a newfound respect cutting through her panic. "You actually did it." "Don't celebrate yet," David warned, watching the ceiling panels. "We're bypassing the AI. The Watson core is going to detect an unauthorized manual ascent. It's going to fight us." As if summoned by his words, the red emergency lighting flickered aggressively. A loud, rhythmic klaxon began to blare from the shaft outside, vibrating through the metal walls. The elevator jerked violently, slowing its ascent to a crawl. The temperature, already uncomfortable, seemed to spike as the friction of the mechanical override generated immense heat. Evelyn unbuttoned the collar of her Tom Ford silk blouse, her breathing growing shallow. The early stages of hypoxia were creeping in. "David," she said, finally using his name. "Who stands to gain from this? You asked me earlier. If this is a trap, it's not just a disgruntled employee. Richard couldn't orchestrate this alone. He doesn't have the clearance for a physical perimeter breach." David kept his eyes on the doors. "You're the billionaire. Who wants your empire bad enough to bury you in a steel box?" Evelyn's mind raced, the lack of oxygen making her thoughts swim, but her predatory business instincts remained sharp. "The BlackRock merger," she murmured, leaning her head against the cool glass mirror. "We finalized it at 4 p.m. But my chief operating officer, Gregory Langdon, fought me on it for months. He wanted to sell our proprietary AI grid to the Vanguard Group. I vetoed it. I humiliated him in front of the board." "Humiliation is a powerful motivator," David noted, checking his Leatherman tool, making sure the blades were locked. "Gregory holds the secondary security keys to the Johnson Controls Automation Hub," Evelyn realized, her eyes widening in the dim red light. "He was the one who insisted I take the executive elevator today while the board took the helicopters. He said the press was waiting in the lobby and I should avoid them via the private garage." "So, Gregory and your fired CTO teamed up," David pieced it together. "They blind the elevator, trap you, and let the building's own failsafe suffocate you. Clean, untraceable. The media blames a tragic software glitch in a smart building." The elevator gave a final, agonizing shudder and ground to a complete halt. "We've stopped," Evelyn said, panic rising again. David pressed his ear against the metal door. "We hit the leveling zone of the next floor, floor 75. The counterweight can't pull us any higher without the motorized winches." He stepped back and wedged his fingers into the microscopic seam between the two titanium elevator doors. "Now comes the hard part. The magnetic locks are still engaged. I need to break the seal." "Can you do it?" Evelyn asked, her vision beginning to blur slightly at the edges. The heat was stifling. "I have to," David grunted. He jammed the flathead of his heavy pry bar into the seam. Muscles corded on his neck as he threw his entire body weight against the steel lever. "Think about Chloe. Think about Chloe," he muttered under his breath, a mantra fueling his desperate strength. Metal shrieked against metal. The seal refused to yield. David readjusted, his boots slipping on the slick floor. "Evelyn, I need your help. Pull on the left door, find the groove and pull." Evelyn didn't hesitate. She dropped her phone, wedged her perfectly manicured fingers into the expanding gap, and pulled with a feral strength she didn't know she possessed. The polished CEO was gone. In her place was a woman fighting for her last breath. With a deafening crack, the magnetic lock snapped. The doors slid apart, revealing a concrete gap and a set of exterior floor doors. David quickly wedged his toolbox into the gap so they wouldn't snap shut. "We're 3 feet below the floor line," David observed, shining the flashlight up into the gap. "I'll boost you. Grab the ledge and crawl out." Evelyn nodded, her breath ragged. David cupped his hands, and she stepped in, launching herself upward. She scrambled over the dusty concrete lip, tearing her suit trousers and scraping her knees, rolling onto the cold, hard tiles of the 75th floor. David followed a second later, pulling himself up with sheer upper body strength. They collapsed on the floor, gasping the cool, heavily air-conditioned air of the open corridor. "We made it," Evelyn choked out, coughing as her lungs expanded with fresh oxygen. "Don't get too comfortable," David said, standing up and sweeping his flashlight down the dark, eerily quiet hallway. "We're in the mechanical and server tier. and we are definitely not alone. Floor 75 was a stark contrast to the luxurious marble and glass of the executive suites. It was a cavernous, utilitarian labyrinth designed purely for machines. Massive train cooling units hummed in the distance, chilling rows upon rows of Dell EMC PowerEdge server racks that stored the heartbeat of Croft Holdings' empire. The standard overhead fluorescents were dead, replaced by the eerie, pulsating crimson glow of the emergency backup lighting. David helped Evelyn to her feet. She dusted off her ruined suit, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows. The vulnerability of the elevator was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. Gregory had tried to kill her. The staircase access doors on this level are electronically controlled by a Palo Alto Networks firewall system, Evelyn whispered, keeping her voice low. If the building is in level 4 lockdown, those doors are magnetically sealed with 10,000 pounds of force. We can't take the stairs. Then we need to find a localized terminal to bypass the lockdown, David said, gripping his heavy wrench like a weapon. Or find a physical landline that hasn't been cut. They moved cautiously through the aisles of towering black server racks. The ambient noise was a cacophony of whirring cooling fans and clicking hard drives. It was a digital fortress. Suddenly, David stopped, holding up a hand. He killed the flashlight. "What is it?" Evelyn breathed against his shoulder. "Look." He pointed down the central aisle. At the far end of the server farm, bathed in the glow of a localized halogen work lamp, sat a makeshift workstation. A ruggedized Panasonic Toughbook was hardwired directly into the main fiber optic trunk line, the central nervous system of the Genesis Tower. Green progress bars raced across the laptop's screen. Beside the laptop stood a man in a dark maintenance uniform. He was smoking a cigarette, casually watching the screen, a suppressed Heckler and Coke USP pistol resting on the metal casing of the server rack beside him. Evelyn's breath hitched. "That's not maintenance. That's a private contractor. A mercenary." David analyzed the setup. "He's not just holding the floor. Look at the data bridge. That thick yellow cable is a high-speed fiber tap." He looked at Evelyn, the reality dawning on him. "They aren't just trying to kill you. They're stealing everything." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, processing the information with the speed of a supercomputer. The Vanguard Group merger. Gregory isn't just taking over the company. He's bleeding it dry. He's downloading the proprietary source code for the Genesis AI. Our international trading algorithms are R&D patents. Everything. "How much is that data worth?" David asked. "Billions," Evelyn replied coldly. "Once the download completes, he'll likely trigger a logic bomb to wipe these servers clean. It covers his tracks perfectly. I die in an elevator malfunction. The data is destroyed in a system failure, and Gregory steps in as the grieving CEO to rebuild, selling the stolen IP under the table to Vanguard." David watched the green progress bar on the distant screen. It was at 88%. "We have to stop that download," Evelyn stated. It wasn't a request. "He has a gun, Evelyn. I have a wrench." "I'm a mechanic, not Jason Bourne," David hissed back. "I need to get back to my daughter. Getting shot over your corporate algorithms isn't in my contract." Evelyn grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "David, listen to me. If that download finishes, they trigger the wipe. A wipe that massive will fry the centralized power grid. The secondary brakes holding our elevator in the shaft, they run on that grid. If the system fries, that elevator drops, tearing the cabling and likely pulling the entire shaft infrastructure down. We won't survive the structural collapse of this floor." David stared at her, then back at the mercenary. The progress bar hit 90%. "Fine," David exhaled, his mind shifting gears from flight to fight. He assessed the environment. Above the mercenary, massive industrial HVAC ducts snaked across the ceiling. Below them, a raised floor paneling system hid the massive bundles of power cables feeding the server farm. "I need a distraction," David said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I need him looking away from that laptop for exactly 10 seconds. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to create a localized short circuit in the cooling matrix," David explained, pointing to a massive train chiller unit 20 feet to their left. "It will blow the pressure valve and release a cloud of super-chilled Freon gas. It'll sound like a bomb going off. And then I sprint to the trunk line and smash the fiber optic bridge with this wrench." David hefted the heavy steel tool. "It'll sever the connection and corrupt the packet transfer. The download will fail." Evelyn nodded, her jaw set. How do I trigger the distraction? David handed her his Leatherman, folding out the thickest screwdriver blade. Sneak over to that chiller unit. You'll see a red release valve behind a metal grate. Jam this blade into the actuator pin beneath the valve and pry upward. Hard. When it blows, hit the deck. I can do that. Evelyn took the tool. Her hands had stopped shaking. The victim had vanished. The CEO was back, fighting for her empire. David crouched, moving silently to the right, flanking the mercenary through the shadows of the server racks. He positioned himself just 15 feet away from the target, his heart hammering against his ribs. He thought of Chloe, waiting at the daycare, wondering where her dad was. He tightened his grip on the wrench. 93%, 94%. Evelyn reached the chiller unit. She knelt on the grating, locating the red valve in the dim light. She jammed the steel blade into the actuator pin, took a deep breath, and shoved upward with all her might. It's ice. Our duden salbais mein two rectigens overadjust. An ear-splitting shriek tore through the silence of the server room. A massive geyser of freezing white vapor erupted from the chiller unit, instantly plunging that side of the room into absolute, blinding fog. The localized temperature dropped 30 degrees in a second. The mercenary cursed, grabbing his suppressed pistol and spinning toward the sound, raising his weapon at the thick cloud of gas. "Who's there?" he shouted. It was the opening David needed. He lunged from the shadows, clearing the 15 feet in 3 massive strides. He didn't go for the man. He went for the machine. Bringing the heavy steel wrench high above his head, David brought it down with devastating, bone-jarring force directly onto the customized fiber optic bridge, connecting the laptop to the server. Crack. Plastic shattered. Silicon splintered. The delicate glass fibers inside the trunk line snapped cleanly in half. The laptop screen flickered violently, error messages cascading across the screen in red text. Error 404. Connection severed. Data transfer failed. The mercenary spun around, realizing he had been tricked. He leveled the gun at David's chest. "You son of a..." Before the mercenary could finish his sentence or pull the trigger, Evelyn emerged from the fog behind him like a ghost. She gripped a heavy, rack-mounted power supply unit she had ripped from a nearby shelf and swung it with brutal efficiency, catching the mercenary square in the back of the head. The man crumpled to the floor instantly, the gun clattering harmlessly away across the tiles. Evelyn stood over him, dropping the power supply, her chest heaving. She looked at David, then down at the ruined laptop. "Download terminated," David said, letting out a shaky breath. Suddenly, the red emergency lights flashed rapidly, turning into a blinding strobe. A new, much louder siren began to wail, echoing through the cavernous floor. A synthesized voice boomed from the overhead speakers. "Warning. Catastrophic data breach protocol activated. Level 5 lockdown engaged. Law enforcement has been notified. This sector is now sealed." Heavy steel blast doors slammed shut over the stairwell exits at the far ends of the hall, the magnetic locks engaging with a deafening thud. David looked at Evelyn, wiping grease from his cheek. "Well, we stopped the heist." "Yes," Evelyn said, staring at the locked blast doors. "But Gregory's entire team is likely on this building's security payroll. When the police arrive, they'll be met by Gregory's men, not real cops." She looked back at David, the cold reality settling in. "We are sealed inside a vault with the evidence, and the people coming to open it are the ones trying to kill us." The heavy steel blast doors of floor 75 shuddered violently. A faint, muffled thump echoed through the cavernous server farm, followed quickly by the distinct, high-pitched whine of a rotary saw biting into reinforced titanium. Gregory Langdon's men had arrived, and they weren't bothering with electronic keypads. Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the bright orange sparks cascading from the seams. "My own security team," she whispered. The betrayal burned hotter than the overworked servers around them. David dragged the unconscious mercenary behind a massive row of Dell EMC racks, securing his wrists with zip ties. "They're cutting through the hinges," he noted grimly. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they breach." "Evelyn, is there any analog line out of this room?" Evelyn forced her panic down, compartmentalizing the terror to map the blueprints in her mind. The high-frequency trading line, she realized. To beat the market, Croft Holdings needs zero latency. "We installed a dedicated microwave transmitter on the roof that bypasses the city grid and all internal firewalls. The trunk line runs directly through this floor. David's eyes lit up. He grabbed the mercenary's fiber optic fusion splicer. "Show me the line." She led him to a heavily armored yellow conduit. David slammed his wrench against it until the plastic shattered, revealing a bundle of hair-thin glass wires. Boom, boom. A battering ram hit the blast doors at the far end of the hall. "Boot the laptop in safe mode," David instructed, his grease-stained hands moving with surgical precision. He stripped the protective coating from the HFT fiber and cannibalized an Ethernet cable to create a makeshift bridge. Evelyn dropped to her knees, hammering the cracked keyboard. "I'm in the local cache. The security footage of Gregory disabling the fail-safes is here. I'm compressing it into a single encrypted file and sending it directly to Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling." David placed the delicate glass fibers into the V-groove of the splicer. He held his breath and pressed the button. A microscopic electric arc melted the fibers together. Connection made. Evelyn hit enter. A progress bar appeared on the black screen. Uploading of 15%, of 30%. A deafening crash shook the room. The right blast door shrieked and gave way. 6 men clad in corporate security uniforms stormed the server farm, sweeping the aisles with the laser sights of their rifles. David and Evelyn crouched low. The progress bar crawled. 75%, 88%. Heavy combat boots thudded against the floor panels, drawing closer. The sweeping beams of their flashlights cut through the shadows, mere feet from where they hid. 99%, 100%. Transmission complete. Evelyn let out a sharp exhale and immediately slammed her heel down onto the laptop's motherboard, crushing the processor so the signal couldn't be intercepted. The crunch of plastic echoed loudly. "Right here, hands in the air." 2 guards rounded the corner, rifles leveled. David slowly raised his hands, letting his wrench drop. Evelyn stood tall beside him, refusing to cower. A moment later, Gregory Langdon stepped through the ruined doors, a smug, victorious smirk on his face. "Evelyn," Gregory sighed, "I expected you to quietly expire in that elevator. Now look at this mess. Execute them. Make it look like smoke inhalation before you torch the racks." The lead guard raised his rifle. David tensed, closing his eyes and thinking of his daughter. But the gunshot never came. Instead, the chaotic wail of dozens of police sirens echoed from the streets 80 floors below, growing into a deafening chorus. Gregory's smirk vanished. He pulled a walkie-talkie from his belt. "Status report." A panicked voice crackled back. "Mr. Langdon, SWAT teams just breached the lobby. They have our master access codes." Gregory stared at Evelyn, absolute terror replacing his arrogance. "What did you do?" "I fire you, Gregory," she said coldly. Within minutes, heavily armed Chicago SWAT officers flooded the floor. Gregory and his corrupt detail were put in cuffs. As paramedics wrapped foil blankets around David and Evelyn, checking their vitals, Evelyn turned to him. "David, where is your daughter right now?" "Street Jude's after-school care," David said, his voice raw. "I don't know how I'm going to explain this." Evelyn turned to a police captain. "I am ordering you to take this man to his daughter right now. He saved this entire city from a financial crisis." 30 minutes later, David sprinted up the steps of the child care center. Inside, sitting alone in the lobby, was 6-year-old Chloe. "Daddy!" she yelled. David dropped to his knees, burying his face in her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, baby bug. Daddy got stuck at work." Watching from the doorway, wrapped in her foil blanket, Evelyn felt a profound silence settle over her. She realized she had spent her life building a fortress to keep the world out, only to trap herself inside it. A week later, Evelyn restructured Croft Holdings, dismantling the autonomous AI and canceling the Vanguard merger. That Friday evening, David was in his apartment when Evelyn knocked on his door. "I came to deliver 2 things. Evelyn smiled, stepping inside. She handed him an envelope containing a certified check for $5 million. That's a consultant fee. Before David could process the shock, she handed him a silver keycard. "I fired my engineering department. I need a new head of physical systems diagnostics. Someone who understands buildings are for people, not computers. You name your hours, and Chloe's medical expenses are completely covered." David looked at the woman he had survived the dark with. "Okay," he smiled, "but on one condition. I leave at 5 p.m. every Friday. I have a cardboard spaceship to build." Evelyn laughed warmly. "Deal," Mr. Hayes. In the end, the Genesis Tower's survival didn't rely on automated AI, but on a single father's courage and a CEO's newfound humanity. David's actions exposed a corporate conspiracy, earning him a life-changing reward. Evelyn restructured Croft Holdings, proving no algorithm can ever replace the vital importance of human oversight, resilience, and genuine compassion.